Hey everyone, have you heard about the $4.5 trillion tax cut that just passed the House? This is one of the biggest tax cuts in U.S. history, and depending on where you stand financially, it could be a huge win or a major loss. So today, we're breaking it all down. Who wins, who loses, and how this could impact you. Before we dive into what's happening now, let's go back to 2017, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA, reshaped the tax system. Back then, corporate tax rates were slashed from 35% to 21%, a massive windfall for businesses. Individual tax rates were adjusted, with the top tax bracket dropping from 39.6% to 37%. The standard deduction was doubled, making it easier for people to file taxes, but at the same time, personal exemptions were eliminated. One of the biggest changes was the state and local tax SALT deduction cap, which limited how much people in high-tax states like Texas, New York, and California could deduct. It was a major blow for upper-middle-class earners in those areas. All of these provisions were set to expire in 2025. But now, with this new bill, they're about to become permanent, along with even more tax breaks. So what exactly does this new tax bill do? First, it locks in the 2017 Trump tax cuts. That means the top tax bracket stays at 37% instead of going back up to 39.6%. Corporate taxes also remain at 21%, preventing a planned increase. On top of that, it introduces more savings for high-income earners and business owners. At first glance, that might sound great. Who wouldn't want lower taxes, right? But here's the thing. The government still needs money to function, and instead of making up for the lost revenue elsewhere, Congress decided to slash $2 trillion from government programs. So what might be getting cut? The biggest chunk, $880 billion, might be coming from Medicaid. That means up to 21 million people could lose their health coverage. If you rely on Medicaid, you might have to jump through more hoops just to stay eligible. Stricter rules, more paperwork, fewer benefits, and for some, losing coverage entirely. And it's not just healthcare that's on the chopping block. Education and student aid are facing $330 billion in cuts. That means fewer school meal programs, tougher access to student loans. If you or your kids are planning on going to college, this could make it a lot more expensive. Then there's food assistance. SNAP, which helps 42 million Americans put food on the table, is getting hit with a $230 billion cut. That means fewer benefits per household and stricter requirements to qualify. Critics are calling it a cruel attack on struggling families, while supporters argue that it could reduce dependency on government assistance in the long run. But the scariest part? There's another $500 billion in unassigned cuts. That means we don't even know yet which programs will be slashed. It could be affordable housing, disability benefits, veterans' health care, or Social Security programs. If you rely on any kind of government support, you might want to pay close attention in the coming months. Now let's break down exactly how the high earners and big corporations win with this tax cut. First, high-income earners get the biggest tax breaks. Right now, the top tax bracket is 37%, which applies to people making over $609,350 per year. Under this new tax cut plan, that rate stays at 37%, instead of going back up to 39.6% as it was before the 2017 tax cuts. That might not sound like a huge difference, but let's break it down with real numbers. If someone makes $1 million per year, their taxes are calculated based on brackets, meaning different portions of their income are taxed at different rates. Here's how it looks before the tax cut. The first $11,600 is taxed at 10%. So they pay $1,160 in taxes on that portion. The next $35,550 is taxed at 12%, so they pay $42.66 in taxes on that portion. The next $53,375 is taxed at 22%, meaning they owe $11,742 on that portion. And the next $91,425 is taxed at 24%, which adds another $21,942 in taxes. Okay, let's see. The next $51,775 is taxed at 32%, which comes out to $16,568 in taxes. And the next $365,625 is taxed at 35%, which equals $127,969 in taxes. Finally, everything above $609,350 is taxed at 37%, meaning the last $390,650 is taxed at $144,541. Altogether, this person would owe $328,188 in federal income taxes, which means their effective tax rate is 32.8%. Now let's see what happens under the new tax cut. Since the top tax rate drops to 33%, that last portion of $390,650, which was previously taxed at 37%, now gets taxed at 33%, bringing that amount down to $128,915 instead of $144,541. That means their total tax bill drops from $328,188 to $278,500, saving them nearly $50,000 per year. So, if someone makes $10 million per year, the savings grow even more. The amount taxed at 37% drops to 33%, reducing their tax burden by $375,688 per year. And for someone making $1 billion per year, they could see $40 million in annual tax savings, just from this rate adjustment alone. But it's not just about the tax brackets. Another major win for the wealthy comes from how investment income is taxed. Unlike regular wages, investment income from stocks, real estate, and dividends is taxed at much lower rates. Currently, long-term capital gains and dividends are taxed at 20% for people earning over $500,000 per year, but this tax cut aims to lower that to 15% or even lower. That means a doctor earning $600,000 per year through salary pays 37% in income tax, while a wealthy investor making the same amount from stocks might only pay 15% under the new tax plan. This is why billionaires like Elon Musk and Warren Buffett often pay lower tax rates than their own employees. Now let's talk about big corporations and how they win big under this tax cut. Corporations were supposed to see their taxes increase to 28%, but instead, they stay at 21%. And companies like Amazon, Tesla, and Apple already pay little to nothing in taxes, and will continue to do so. Take Amazon, for example. In 2018, they made $11.2 billion in profits. Under the 21% corporate tax rate, they should have paid $235 billion in taxes. Instead, they paid $0 in federal income taxes. Not only that, but they actually received a $129 million refund. So how did they do it? First, Amazon used depreciation deductions to lower its taxable income. The company invests billions into warehouses, trucks, and data centers. Under the Trump tax cuts, companies were allowed to immediately write off 100% of the cost of new investments, instead of spreading the cost over time. This wiped out billions in taxable profits right away. Next, Amazon claimed research and development, R&D tax credits. Since they spent $28.8 billion on R&D, they received hundreds of millions in tax credits, which directly reduced their tax bill. Another trick Amazon used was stock-based compensation deductions. Instead of paying executives in cash salaries, they paid them in stock options, which allowed them to deduct billions from their taxable income, even though no cash was spent. Amazon also carried forward past losses to cancel out future profits. When Amazon was growing in the early 2000s, they lost money for years. Under U.S. tax laws, companies can use past losses to offset future profits, meaning that even when they became profitable, they were able to reduce their taxable income using those old losses. Finally, Amazon benefited from state and local tax incentives. When they opened their headquarters in Virginia, they received $750 million in tax incentives from the state, lowering their tax burden even more. With all these strategies combined, Amazon legally paid nothing in federal taxes despite earning billions in profit. And with this new tax cut, these loopholes remain in place, meaning corporations will continue paying little to nothing in federal taxes, while everyday people see public services get cut. Meanwhile, if you're a middle-class worker, you might save a few $100s in taxes. But what happens when that tax cut is offset by higher healthcare costs, fewer student loan benefits, and reduced government services? So, at the end of the day, who's really winning? If you're a millionaire or billionaire, you just got a massive tax break. If you're middle class, you might get a small tax cut, but you'll likely pay more later as government programs get slashed. And if you rely on Medicaid, food assistance, student aid, or other social programs, you're losing the most. Here is another interesting factor. According to the U.S. Census Bureau's 2023 report, I've compiled a table showing which states rely most on federal funding, their median household incomes, and how they voted in the 2024 election. This highlights which states may be hit hardest by the proposed $2 trillion in federal spending cuts. The percentage of federal funding as a portion of state revenue represents how much of a state's total budget comes from federal funds. In other words, it shows the degree to which each state relies on money from the federal government to operate its services, such as Medicaid, education, food assistance, and infrastructure projects. This table illustrates that several states with a high reliance on federal funding and lower median household incomes predominantly supported President Trump in the 2024 election. Consequently, these states are likely to experience more significant impacts from the proposed federal spending cuts, potentially affecting essential services such as Medicaid, education, and infrastructure. It's important to note that while the tax cuts aim to stimulate economic growth, the accompanying spending reductions could lead to increased financial strain on these states, potentially widening the disparity between wealthier and poorer regions. Why does this matter? Since the new $4.5 trillion tax cut includes $2 trillion in federal spending reductions, states that rely more on federal funding will feel the biggest impact when that money disappears. For example, Mississippi, which voted for Trump, gets 25.9% of its revenue from federal funds. If Medicaid and food assistance funding are cut, Mississippi residents may face higher costs or loss of services. Or Montana relies on 31.8% of its budget from federal money. A reduction in federal funding could mean cuts to infrastructure projects, public education, and social programs. What happens when federal funding is cut? States with high reliance on federal funding will either cut services, Medicaid, food aid, public schools, or raise state taxes to cover the lost money. Poorer states, many of which supported Trump, may struggle the most because they lack large tax bases to make up for lost federal money. Wealthier states may be able to absorb the loss more easily because they generate more state revenue from businesses and high-income earners. Key takeaway: the higher the percentage of federal funding a state relies on, the more that state stands to lose from federal budget cuts. Many of the states most affected by these cuts voted for Trump, which means the very people who supported these tax cuts may experience the harshest consequences when social programs and public services lose funding. In summary, the proposed federal spending cuts are poised to have a more pronounced effect on states with lower median household incomes and higher dependence on federal funding, many of which supported President Trump in the election. These states may face difficult decisions regarding the continuation of essential services and programs that rely on federal funding. So, do these tax cuts really help the economy, or are they just another way to make the rich richer? Let's talk about it in the comments, and if you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real talk on money, taxes, and policy. Thanks for watching.